I find myself in a situation, a quiet, creeping predicament that has wrapped itself around my life so tightly I can barely breathe. To be honest, I have no idea what to do or who to turn to. Perhaps laying it all out, starting from the very beginning, will provide some clarity. It all started 5 years ago. My next-door neighbor, Charles or Charlie, as we usually called him, was a good man. We lived a comfortable suburban life, the kind where you borrow a cup of sugar and wave as you pull out of the driveway. He and his wife, Kathy, were our friends. So, when he appeared on our doorstep one evening, his face ashen and his eyes hollowed out with a grief I'd never seen before, we knew something was terribly wrong. He informed us that their only son, a bright, lanky 14-year-old named Leo, had vanished. The days that followed were a blur of flashing police lights, grim-faced officers canvassing the neighborhood, and the ubiquitous, heart-wrenching sight of Leo's smiling face on flyers stapled to every telephone pole. It was on the local news, a lead story that cast a dark shadow over our entire community. My wife and I felt a profound, helpless sorrow for them. We brought over casseroles that likely went uneaten, offered to mow their lawn, anything to ease a burden that was clearly unbearable. As the years ground on, the hope that had once flickered in our neighborhood slowly died out. The flyers faded and tore in the wind. The news crews moved on. We all assumed, in that unspoken way people do, that Charles and Kathy had come to terms with the most horrific of possibilities. My wife and I, for all our closeness, never found the courage to ask the question that lingered in the air between our two houses. Had they ever found him? Had a body ever turned up? It felt like a violation to even speak it aloud. We still had them over for barbecues in the warmer months, but the easy laughter of the past was gone. They were ghosts of their former selves. Kathy, once a vibrant woman who loved to garden, became withdrawn, her conversations trailing off as she stared into the middle distance. Charles grew awkward and perpetually nervous, his hands always trembling slightly, his eyes darting around as if expecting a blow. It was all understandable, of course. They were grieving parents, trapped in an endless limbo of not knowing. We gave them their space, their silence. Then, last week, everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening. I was hauling the recycling bin to the curb when Charles approached me. He looked worse than I'd seen him in years, his face pale and slick with sweat despite the cool air. He asked if he could borrow a shovel. Without a second thought, I went to my garage and retrieved my best one, a sturdy tool with a solid oak handle. He offered a clipped, mumbled thanks, saying he had some work to do in the backyard and would return it by morning. He then vanished behind his fence before I could say another word. Later that evening, I was upstairs when I happened to glance out the window that overlooks their property. And there was Charles, in the fading light, wrestling with the earth. He was digging a hole, a seriously large and deep hole, right in the middle of his manicured lawn. He's 56, and the effort was clearly taxing him. He was panting heavily, his movements strained. A pang of neighborly duty struck me. I grabbed my older, second shovel from the garage, and letting myself in through his side gate, called out his name. The reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. He spun around, his eyes wide with a feral panic. He dropped my shovel as if it were red hot and rushed toward me, his hands held up defensively. No, it's okay, Tim," he stammered, his voice a ragged whisper. "I've got it. Please, just leave." I was taken aback. "What's wrong with you, Charlie?" "I'm just trying to help. It's not a big deal." His face hardened, the panic replaced by a cold, unfamiliar fury. "I will not," he hissed, his voice low and trembling with intensity, "allow you to use that shovel in my backyard." He then pointed a shaky finger towards the gate, a gesture of dismissal so absolute it felt like he was commanding a stray dog. I was so stunned by the venom in his tone, by the sheer strangeness of it all that I simply turned and left without another word. Back in my house, my heart was hammering against my ribs. I crept back upstairs and watched him from the cover of my curtains. He continued to dig for at least another half hour. When he finally seemed satisfied with the depth, he stopped and began scanning the neighboring houses, his head tilted up, his gaze sweeping across the upstairs windows, my window. Before I could duck away, our eyes met. He saw me. I saw the look on his face, a flicker of something dark and desperate. All I could do was step back from the window, trying to appear casual, as if I'd just been passing by. But I knew he was up to something, and a cold dread began to pool in my stomach. I kept watch intermittently, but he didn't return to the hole. He knew I was watching. He would wait for the cover of darkness. And I was right. At 1:30 in the morning, I was jolted from a light sleep by a familiar rhythmic sound, the soft thump and scrape of a shovel biting into the earth. It was too dark to see anything from my window now. Driven by a morbid curiosity that outweighed my fear, I slipped out of my house, my bare feet silent on the cold grass. Peering over the tall wooden fence that separated our yards, I could see his silhouette moving in the gloom. He was working again. When he finally straightened up and went back inside his house, I seized my chance. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm as I slipped into his yard. The air was thick with the smell of freshly turned soil. The hole was a black void in the moonlight. As I got closer, I saw it just a small corner of a black, industrial-grade garbage bag, protruding from the loose dirt at the bottom. My mind reeled. What was in it? I glanced frantically from the bag to his back door, a silent, agonizing debate raging within me. Look, don't look. What if he comes back out? What if it's what you think it is? In the end, cowardice or perhaps self-preservation won. I scrambled back over the fence, just as his porch light flickered on. He came back outside seconds later, but he wasn't digging. He walked to the far side of his house and disappeared. I stumbled back to my bed, my mind a chaotic mess, and somehow fell into a fitful sleep. The first thing I did the next morning was look out the window. The hole was gone. The lawn was perfectly smooth, the earth patched up so neatly you'd never know it had been disturbed. I also noticed something else. His large SUV, which was always parked in his driveway, was now parked on the street. I can't stop thinking about what happened in the hours I was asleep. My stomach churns with the horrifying possibility that what lay at the bottom of that hole was Leo, his own son. For all I know, my spying forced him to change his plans. He dug up that hole to remove the evidence he had buried there years ago, loaded it into his SUV, and drove it somewhere else, somewhere new, to dump it. It's all speculation, I know, but the fear it's instilled in me is real. I haven't told a soul, not even my wife. How could I? And Charles never returned my shovel. I'm certainly not going to ask for it back. He's been actively avoiding me, turning the other way if he sees me outside. Then, yesterday, the most disturbing thing yet happened. I was just walking through my living room and happened to glance out the window towards his house. And there he was, standing motionless in his own window, staring directly into mine. When he realized I'd seen him, he didn't duck away or pretend he wasn't looking. He just slowly, deliberately closed his blinds. A silent, chilling acknowledgement of the secret we now share. I have no idea what to do, but for the first time in my life, I am truly, deeply terrified of my neighbor. In my life, I've called 3 places home. The first was the backdrop for my entire childhood, a house we lived in for 15 years. The second was a brief 7-year stop before I finally moved out on my own to my current place. This story is rooted in that first house during the last few months before we moved, when I was 15. My family was never the type to host block parties or get chummy with the neighbors. We were polite, but kept to ourselves. This was especially true of the family next door. A single father lived there with his 2 sons. And in all the years we shared a property line, my brother and I had probably spoken to them a grand total of twice. It's bizarre to think about now, but that's how it was. We knew their names though. Eric and Todd. One sweltering afternoon, my brother, who is 5 years my junior, and I were shooting hoops in our driveway. The rhythmic thud of the basketball, a familiar summer soundtrack. That's when Todd emerged from his house and ambled over. He initiated the conversation, which was a first. I don't recall the exact words, but I vividly remember the first question he asked, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Is it true you guys are moving?" Being the older brother, I did all the talking. Todd was about my age, maybe a year older, but there was an unsettling stillness about him. The conversation was stilted, but by the end of it, he'd extended an invitation. He and Eric were going to shoot BB guns by the river in the woods down the road the next day. Did I want to come? It was the weekend, and with nothing better to do, I agreed. As Todd was about to leave, my little brother piped up, asking if he could tag along. Todd just shrugged and said, "Yeah," then turned and walked away without another word. Late the next afternoon, about an hour before dusk, painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, our doorbell rang. It was Eric and Todd. We hurried them in, careful that our parents didn't see. We'd conveniently left out the BB gun on our plans. Walking down the sidewalk with them was surreal. They were both decked out in full camouflage gear, and Eric was carrying a heavy-looking military-style duffel bag. The level of seriousness they brought to this was deeply strange. My brother and I kept exchanging glances, trying to stifle nervous laughter at the sheer absurdity of it. We reached the woods, the silence between the 4 of us thick and uncomfortable. I was beginning to understand why we'd never become friends with these kids. They were like black holes of charisma. Todd dropped the duffel bag on a patch of dry leaves and unzipped it. At the same moment, Eric, with a sudden burst of violent energy, snapped a thick branch off a nearby tree and hurled it into the slow-moving river. My brother and I looked at each other again. This time, neither of us felt like laughing. Todd pulled out 2 pistols and handed one to each of us. They felt heavier than any BB gun I'd ever held. And that's when he dropped the bomb, his tone as casual as if he were commenting on the weather. "They're real." Before I could even process his words, Eric had grabbed a loaded gun from the bag and started firing across the river, the sharp cracks echoing through the trees. The truth hit me with a jolt of ice-cold fear. He wasn't joking. This was real. A chaotic mix of anger and terror washed over me. I snatched the gun from my brother's stunned hands and placed both of them carefully back in the open bag. "We're not comfortable with this," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "We have to go." Eric stopped firing. Both he and Todd turned to look at us, their expressions hardening into something that was 1 part anger, 1 part contempt. As we scrambled away, back towards the safety of the streetlights, one of them yelled a curse word at our retreating backs. I'd always suspected they were bad news, but this was on another level entirely. I made my brother promise not to speak to them again for the rest of our time there. That night at dinner, we just told our parents they were really weird kids, leaving out the part about the very real handguns. That night, I was awoken by a draft of cold air washing over my face. My bedroom window, which I always kept locked, was wide open. And then I felt it. Something hard and circular pressed firmly against the back of my head. A voice behind me whispered a single sharp sound. "She?" By some miracle, I didn't scream. My body went rigid, but my mind, surprisingly, kicked into high gear. I knew who it was. I could smell the stale cigarette smoke on his clothes. It was Todd. "If you ever tell anyone," he whispered, his voice a venomous hiss right next to my ear. Especially my dad. About the guns, I'll come back. I'll kill you. And I'll kill your entire family. I could only manage a choked, quiet reply. Okay? He pushed my head forward with the gun barrel. A final, emphatic warning before slipping back out my window and disappearing into the night. For the remaining months we lived in that house, my life was a living hell. Every night, I would see one of them, Todd or Eric, a pale silhouette in their upstairs window, just watching my room or my brother's. Their behavior grew more erratic and threatening as our moving day approached. A week before we left, I was jolted awake around 1 a.m. by a sharp crack against my window pane. I scrambled to the window and saw Todd in his yard below, aiming a pistol directly at me. In a blind panic, I dove to the floor, my heart threatening to explode, fully expecting the shatter of glass and the impact of a bullet. Instead, I heard them both erupt in cruel, howling laughter. I heard one of them call me a fucking retard. There were other incidents, shadows lurking by our fence. Whispers carried on the night wind a constant, low-grade campaign of terror. I have never felt such profound relief as I did on the day the moving truck pulled away from that house for the last time. For all these years, neither my brother nor I have ever spoken about the full extent of their threats. We buried it deep. All I know for certain is that those two boys were a special kind of trouble, a darkness festering next door, and we were incredibly lucky to have gotten out of there when we did. This all happened 2 weeks ago, though it feels like a lifetime. I'll be blunt. I've never been a fan of my neighbors. I'm fresh out of college, living on my own for the first time, and the only house I could afford is in a really shitty area. You get what you pay for, and in my case, that meant a cast of characters I wouldn't wish on anyone. The neighbors to my left treat their home like a nightclub, with bass that rattles my windows at all hours. But they're nothing compared to the women on my right. They are, without exaggeration, the creepiest people I have ever encountered. 2 women live in that house. The older one is probably in her 60s, with a perpetually sour face and eyes that seem to look right through you. She's not just unfriendly. She seems fundamentally broken, like she's not all there. Living with her is a younger woman who clearly has some kind of severe mental disability. I have no idea if they're mother and daughter, caretaker and patient, or something else entirely. My front porch used to be my sanctuary, a place to decompress after work, but it became a theater for their unsettling dramas. I'd be sitting there, trying to relax, and I'd look over to see the older woman physically restraining the younger one, who would be in the throes of a full-blown episode. She would cross her arms tightly against her chest and rock back and forth with violent speed, all while screaming and making these awful, guttural noises. Sometimes her wild eyes would land on me. She'd stop screaming, point a trembling finger in my direction, and start mumbling incomprehensibly to the older woman. It was profoundly disturbing. More often than not, I just give up and go back inside, my skin crawling. So one night, a night like any other, I was trying to get to sleep early for work the next day. But the house next door was a cacophony of chaos. The younger woman was screaming, a sustained, frantic shrieking, punctuated by what sounded like things being thrown, and the older woman yelling in distress. This went on for the better part of an hour, the noise drilling into my skull until I couldn't take it anymore. Fueled by exhaustion and frustration, I marched over and banged on their front door. The older woman answered, her face a mask of irritation. "What the hell do you want?" she snapped. I tried to be as polite as possible. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I have to be up early for work, and I was wondering if you could please try to keep the noise down." She responded by raising her eyebrows and tilting her head. a look of pure, unadulterated annoyance. Just then, the younger woman burst into the living room behind her, her face contorted with rage, and began screaming, "How dare you? How dare you?" over and over. The older woman grabbed her by the arm to hold her back, shot me one last venomous glare, and slammed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, stunned, feeling like I had only made things worse. I walked back to my house in defeat, but as I lay down in bed, I realized something. It was silent. Blissfully, completely silent next door. I had won after all. I closed my eyes and finally drifted off to sleep. I woke up with a jolt, feeling like I'd only been asleep for a minute. My room was pitch black. I squinted at my alarm clock. 3 a.m., my head fell back onto the pillow with a sigh of relief. I still had hours left to sleep, but as I lay there, I heard it. A faint creak from downstairs. I froze, straining my ears. I got out of bed, crept to my bedroom door, and listened. Nothing. I dismissed it as the house settling and went back to bed. I woke up again. The clock read 3:20 a.m. This time, I didn't know what had woken me. The house was silent. And then I heard it again, closer this time. A soft, wet, gulping sound. It was coming from inside my room. Panic seized me. My hands scrambled blindly across my bedside table, searching for my phone. When my fingers finally closed around it, I didn't dare turn on the screen. I lay there, paralyzed, my eyes trying to pierce the oppressive darkness, searching for a human shape, a dark figure standing in the corner or by the door. I saw nothing but shadows. Gulp. This time, I knew exactly where it came from. I slowly, terrified, turned my head to look towards the foot of my bed. And there, peeking just over the edge of the wooden footboard, was a black, shadowy, circle-like object. My mind couldn't process what it was. With a trembling thumb, I swiped my phone on. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness and illuminated the face of the deranged woman from next door. She was crouched at the foot of my bed, her eyes wide and black in the sudden light. She let out a scream that was not human. It was a raw, piercing shriek of a cornered animal, as if the light itself was burning her. I screamed too, a strangled cry of pure terror. I scrambled backwards, falling out of bed, and ran for the door, tripping over my own feet. I glanced back and saw her crawling over the bed, following me with terrifying speed. I slammed the bedroom door shut, fumbled with the lock, and sprinted downstairs, locking the door that led from the living room to the staircase. I dialed 911, my voice a hysterical mess, as she began pounding on the other side of the door, her screams now a barrage of incomprehensible rage. When the cops arrived, I told them everything. The older woman came over, drawn by the commotion. She spoke to the officers, her voice a syrupy plea, begging them to let the younger woman go, spinning a story about her being confused. But they were firm. They had to take her in, at least for the night. One of the officers turned to me and asked if I wanted to press charges. As he spoke, the older woman's eyes locked onto mine. The look she gave me was the most evil, hateful thing I have ever witnessed. It was a promise. I chose not to press charges. Her stare didn't waver. They led the younger woman, now whimpering, to their car and drove away. The older woman continued to stare at me, her eyes burning into me, before she turned and walked slowly back to her house. 5 minutes later, I saw her car's headlights sweep across my living room wall as she drove away. They still live there. The older woman is back, and I know the younger one will be soon. That hateful stare is burned into my memory. I'm seriously considering breaking my lease and moving. My house is no longer a safe place. The woman next door makes it clear every time I see her that she despises me, and I now know, with absolute certainty, that her companion is not just mentally ill. She is terrifying, unpredictable, and dangerous. And that's all for tonight. Remember, the most terrifying monsters are the ones that look just like us. The ones who might even live right next door. If these stories serve as a good reminder to trust your instincts, then show your support and like and subscribe. Hitting that bell means you'll get a warning before the next nightmare begins. Sleep well, if you can.